Greetings, and thank you for joining us for a special webinar regarding the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Limited Waiver. I am Congresswoman Shontel Brown, and I hope you enjoyed your Labor Day holiday. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and hope that you find this evening both informative and helpful. As many of you may know, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was signed into law in 2007 to help bring student debt relief to many public and nonprofit workers. However, due to strict requirements, 98% of the public service loan forgiveness applications were denied, meaning tens of thousands of American workers could not benefit from the program designed to help them. The Biden-Harris administration understands that loan forgiveness will not only ease the burden of student debt, but will also help families achieve the American dream of home ownership and generational wealth. So in October 2021, President Biden announced a limited PSLF waiver to expand the program and help thousands of Americans recover from the impact of the pandemic. The president aims to lift the burden of student debt for thousands in our country and hopefully build a more equitable future for all. And because there are so many important updates to the limited waiver and fast approaching deadline, I partnered with the Department of Education to help you start the process to get closer to student debt relief. Before we begin, I want to thank Ashley Harrington with the Department of Education for leading tonight's webinar. I'm excited to hear more about the changes to the PSLF program because I know it will benefit many of you who work so hard to keep our country safe, healthy, and moving forward. So without further delay, I'll send it to Ashley with the Department of Education to start this webinar. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Brown. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to you and your team for putting this together and all the support that you are providing for student loan borrowers across this country already. So I am going to share a lot of information tonight about the limited waiver and our efforts, and we hope it'll be really informative and impactful. But bear with us because it is a lot of information. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then we will get started. All right, can everybody see that? I think you should be able to. So tonight we're going to, thanks Representative Brown. So tonight we're going to talk about a piece of the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to provide targeted student loan relief. One big piece of this has been the limited PSLF waiver, but we just want to make sure that you know the department has already approved nearly $34 billion in debt cancellation for almost 1.7 million borrowers. This is before we even get to the announcement of about a week ago that we'll talk about next. We were already at forgiveness of more debt than any administration had ever done at this rate, right? And so that includes $10 billion for approximately 175,000 public servants through the improvements to PSLF that we're going to talk about today. But we didn't stop there. Last week, President Biden announced our new student loan debt plan, one-time student debt relief that is going to provide up to $20,000 in debt cancellation for borrowers who make less than $125,000, up to $20,000 for borrowers who previously received Pell Grants, up to $10,000 for borrowers who didn't receive Pell Grants. You can find more information at studentaid.gov/debt relief. This is very exciting, but we're not here to talk about that tonight, so I'm going to spend much more time on PSLF waiver, but we hope that you will check this out. The application for this will be available by early October. You can do this and apply for PSLF. We don't want you to not do one because of the other, do all of them. You don't want to miss out on the deadline for the limited PSLF waiver that we're going to talk about next, but also if you can take advantage of this debt relief, you should do so as well. So we announced that. We also announced that we've extended the pause on student loan payments through December 31st of this year to give borrowers a little bit more breathing room and so they can prepare to restart repayment. And we announced a proposal for a new income-based repayment plan with more details on that to come as well. But please check out this website. We just posted some new FAQs for borrowers who are looking for more information. Check out that website and there's a link to the FAQs there. So back to the waiver, right? That's what we're here to talk about as well. For $10 billion in debt relief for 175,000 borrowers through this thing called the limited PSLF waiver. And it's brought another 1.1 million borrowers closer to forgiveness. The average borrower has picked up a year's worth of additional credit towards the 120 credits required for PSLF. So not just the borrowers who have gotten forgiveness, other people can benefit from this. This is not just for people who have been in repayment for a decade or people who have been in public service for a decade. This is for everyone. Everyone could potentially benefit from this waiver, no matter how long you've been in repayment, and we encourage you to take advantage of this. So today we're going to talk about PSLF basics. I think it's always important to start from there. So we start from the same baseline understanding. Then we'll spend some time on the limited PSLF waiver. We'll talk a little bit about the help tool, which is what you're going to use to actually apply for PSLF. And then we'll talk about some resources, and then we'll have a bunch of time at the end for questions. So let's start with the basics. What is PSLF? As the Congresswoman mentioned, PSLF was created in October 2007 by Congress, and it had a seemingly simple premise, right? You forgive the remaining balance on federal direct loans after a borrower has made 120 qualifying monthly payments under a qualifying repayment plan while working full-time for a qualifying employer. And this is just a visual to lay that out for you. 120 qualifying payments on direct loans while working for a qualifying employer. When applying for and receiving PSLF, and at the end, whatever's left over is forgiven and is not taxable income. So you heard me say qualifying a couple of times. We like to say you have to have the right loan with the right repayment with the right job. So we're going to dig into each of those pieces in turn. So first, what's the right loan? You have to have the right type of loan for PSLF, and that's direct loans. It does include consolidation loans and some Parent Plus loans, but we'll talk a little bit more about Parent Plus loans next. It doesn't include FEL program loans or Perkins loans or any other federal or private student loans. FEL program loans are federal family education loans. These are loans that were issued by private institutions like Sallie Mae or Wells Fargo or Chase, but guaranteed by the federal government. Perkins loans are student loans that were issued by institutions of higher education, but guaranteed by the federal government. And so none of those counted. And what's interesting is back in 2007, when PSLF was first created, the FEL program was actually the bigger program. There were more FEL borrowers than direct borrowers, but these borrowers weren't automatically eligible for PSLF. Now, these borrowers could consolidate. They've always been able to consolidate into the PSLF program. If you have FEL loans or Perkins loans, you could consolidate. But once you did that, you started at zero. You didn't get any credit for the time in repayment or in service prior to that. Even if you had direct loans and you consolidated, for whatever reason, you started at zero. So over the years, that has been a big concern and source of confusion, the type of loans and the fact that people who consolidated started at zero. So we talked about the right loan, the right repayment. To count towards the 120, it has to be made on time on a standard plan or an income-driven repayment plan. You may hear me say IDR or IBR, income-driven repayment or income-based repayment. I use them interchangeably. These are just payments based on someone's income. It has to be for at least the amount due. It can be non-consecutive. So it doesn't have to be 120 payments in a straight line in a row in 10 years. It can take you 15 years. It can take you 20 years. It can take you however long. It doesn't have to be consecutive. It can't be more than 15 days late. It can't be made on a graduated, extended, or alternative plan. It can't be for less than the amount due, and it can't be made when not required. So if you're in school and your loans are deferred, or you're in that grace period following when you leave school, you can get credit for that time. You can do multiple payments in 1 month and get credit as long as it adds up to the amount due and it's paid within 15 days of the due date. You also can do lump sum payments. It's limited to 12 months of payments or until your IDR recertification date, because you do have to recertify your income every year for income-driven repayment. And keep in mind, even if you do a lump sum, you can't get forgiveness early because you still have to work in your qualifying job for that amount of time as well. So just a quick note on Parent Plus loans, because this is these are big pieces that people in our community have to use to send their kids to college. So Parent Plus loans are not excluded from PSLF. They're not excluded. And it's based on the parent's employment, not the students. But the thing about Parent Plus loans is they're not eligible for all income-driven repayment plans. So we just talked about how for PSLF, you need to be on a IDR plan or a standard plan. The standard plan for student loans is actually a 10-year fully amortizing plan. So if you're on that plan, you don't have anything to forgive at the end of 10 years or 120 payments. So you really want to be on an IDR plan. But in order for Parent Plus borrowers to get on an IDR plan, they have to consolidate. And then once they do that, their new consolidation loan can get access to one of the IDR plans. It's called ICR, income contingent repayment, and it's the least generous of the IDR plans. So it's the least affordable. And so we do encourage parent borrowers to use our loan simulator to compare how that ICR payment on a consolidation loan would look next to the graduated or extended payment they may currently be making and what makes sense for them in the long term and the short term of their repayment. So what's the right job? We talked about the right loan, we talked about the right repayment. Now we're going to talk about the right job. Has to be full-time, which we define as 30 hours a week or the equivalent for a government entity. That's federal, state, local, tribal, and it does include military, all 501c3 nonprofits, and some other nonprofits if they provide a qualifying public service. So that's things like emergency management, public health, early childhood education, and things like that. It doesn't include part-time work if it doesn't add up to full-time. It doesn't include volunteer work. So if you're not getting paid, that doesn't count. It doesn't include any for-profit entities, and it doesn't include labor unions or partisan political organizations. So we like to say it's about the employer. It's not about the job. We're not going to ask you what you do for that agency or what you do for that organization. We're not worried about that. We're not going to ask you how much you make. We just want to know who you work for, who pays you, and is it a government entity or a 501c3 nonprofit or another type of nonprofit that provides a qualifying public service. That's all we want to know. You can even have multiple part-time jobs and have it add up to full-time employment, and that counts. So if I work 15 hours a week at Department of Ed and another 15 hours a week at a 501c3 nonprofit, I work 30 hours a week in public service, and that counts towards that can count towards my 120. We also have something called temporary expanded PSLF. This is something else that was created by Congress through appropriations, and it just provides loan forgiveness for those who don't qualify for PSLF only because they were on the wrong repayment plan. So it opens up the option of PSLF for people who are on extended or graduated plans. This is not to be confused with a limited waiver that we're going to talk about in just a second. Just a flag, because I mentioned earlier that we just extended the payment pause through December 31st of this year. Everyone here should know that even though you haven't had to make payments since March of 2020, you can get credit for every single one of these months towards PSLF. So I think that's like 30 plus months now, right? You can get credit for every single one of these months as long as you can still show that you had qualifying employment. So that puts you more than a fourth of the way towards the 120 required for PSLF, even though we haven't been required to make a payment. So now we're gonna talk about the good stuff, the exciting stuff, the new updates to public service, which are not so new anymore because we did this last October and we only have a short amount of time left, but there's still time for you to take advantage of this. Prior to this waiver that we're about to talk about, 7,000 borrowers had gotten forgiveness, only 7,000 borrowers. In less than a year, we have approved $10 billion in forgiveness for more than 175,000 borrowers. And so this is how we get there. We get there through these changes, through this waiver, through this commitment to making sure that these programs work and that they work for more borrowers. So last October, we announced the limited PSLF waiver, temporary changes to PSLF program rules that last for a limited time. Under the waiver, borrowers can get credit for past periods of repayment that normally don't count for PSLF. So under these new temporary rules, you can get credit for any prior period of repayment, no matter the loan program, repayment plan, whether you made a payment, whether you made a payment in full, or whether you made it on time. We're not looking at any of that. So we don't care whether you want IDR or not. We don't care about any of that. We just want to know, were you in something that we call active repayment status? And we define that very generously. We're even including some periods of deferment and forbearance. You still need qualifying employment, so you still have to certify that, but this is a game changer. This is really huge, the fact that you can now get credit for these payments. And that's how you get from 7,000 to 175,000 borrowers in less than a year. And this change applies to student loan borrowers who have direct loans, those who have already consolidated into the direct loan program, and those who consolidate into the direct loan program by October 31st of this year. That's the deadline. That's one of the key takeaways I hope you have from today, that you have to take steps by October 31st of this year if you want to take advantage of the waiver. So payments made prior to consolidation are now eligible. So remember, we talked about how if you had a FFEL loan or a Perkins loan, you could consolidate, but you started at zero. Under the waiver, that's no longer the case. Under the waiver, you no longer start at zero. If you previously consolidated, you can now get credit for the time prior to consolidation if you certify employment. If you still have non-direct loans, you consolidate now and you don't start at zero. You can get credit for that time when it's still a FEL or Perkins loan. You don't have to start at zero. That's the biggest change. So we're not looking at your loan program. We don't care whether you had a direct loan, a FEL loan, or a Perkins loan. We're not looking at your repayment plan, extended, IDR, standard. We don't care. We're not looking at what repayment plan you're on all the way through this waiver, right? We're not looking at your loan type with the exception of Parent Plus, which we'll talk about next. So we're not looking at any of that. You still had to have been employed for a qualifying employer, and you have to act now if you still have non-direct loans. You have to consolidate by October 31st of this year. And if you've never submitted a PSLF form, you have to do that by October 31st this year as well. Because after that, we're going back to the normal PSLF and TEPSLF rules. So you might fall into one of three borrower groups, right? You might only have direct loans. If you only have direct loans, you just want to make sure that you have a PSLF form on file. And it's for employment after October 2007, because that's when PSLF was created. Now, you don't have to worry about consolidating if you have only direct loans. The only reason you might worry about consolidating if you only have direct loans is if you have loans that have different periods of repayment. So say you have some undergrad loans and then later you went back to school and you went to grad school and now you have new loans. The grad loans are newer, right? And you have undergrad loans, but you were in public service in between grad school and undergrad. So now your undergrad loans have like, I don't know, 30 payments and your grad loans have like 10 payments or 40 payments and 10 payments. If you consolidate now under the waiver by 1031, the entire consolidation loan will get access, will have that entire amount of credit for the undergrad loans, meaning you can potentially get your grad loans forgiven sooner because you've consolidated with your undergrad loans. So that's the only reason you would think about consolidating if you have direct loans. If you previously consolidated into direct loan program, you want to submit forms for the time prior to consolidation so you can get that credit for PSLF. And if you still have FEL or Perkins loans, you have the most to do because you need to consolidate your loans into the direct loan program and get a form in by October 31st of this year. So just a quick note about Parent Plus loans, because we did talk about them and how they are PSLF eligible, sorry. They are PSLF eligible, but you can't get additional credits under the waiver for Parent Plus loans. So we talked about how many Parent Plus borrowers are going to have to consolidate to get an ICR plan to put themselves in the best position to take advantage of PSLF. So if you have a direct consolidation loan with underlying Parent Plus, and it only has underlying Parent Plus, you're not going to get any additional credit for that time when it was purely a Parent Plus loan. Like if it was a FEL loan, a student loan, you could have gotten additional time, right? We talked about that. You're not starting at zero, but you're not getting any additional time for when it was purely a Parent Plus loan. Now you might get additional time for the time after consolidation. If you missed a payment or you were on the wrong repayment plan, you can get that credit, but not for the time when it was purely Parent Plus. And if you have a Parent Plus loan and you consolidated it with your own student loans, so you had your own student loans, consolidated them together with Parent Plus, you have a direct consolidation loan. That direct consolidation loan can get credit for the underlying student loan, and it'll apply to the entire consolidation loan, just not for the time when it was only purely a Parent Plus loan. So we get a lot of questions about, here you're talking about all these different loan types, FEL, Perkins, Parent Plus. How do I know what type of loan I have? And even for the new debt relief announcement, right? People are wondering, how do I know what type of loan I have? How do I know if I have a Pell Grant? The best way to do that is to log into your studentaid.gov account. If you don't have a studentaid.gov account, please get one. It's the best place to go to get information about your loans and to manage your loans. It's where you're going to go to apply for PSLF. It's where you're going to go to apply for income-based repayments, where you're going to go to check all of this stuff. So you definitely want to have your information in there and up to date and have an account. But when you log into your studentaid.gov account, you'll be able to see your aid summary and you'll be able to click on your loans. And when you expand them, each of your loans will have a name and it will literally say direct or FEL or Perkins. And you don't have to wonder what type of loan it is. If it doesn't say direct anywhere in the title, it's not a direct loan and you're going to need to consolidate that if you want it to be eligible for the waiver. So quick recap. Take advantage of the waiver. You want to confirm your employer is qualified, consolidate those loans if you need to, and submit a PSLF form, and you want to do it all by October 31st of this year. So I do want to flag a few things about consolidation because while we're encouraging a lot of folks to consolidate, and you do need to consolidate, for many borrowers, take advantage of this waiver. Consolidation is not without consequences, sales charge. It's not things that happen, right? And I will say that because of this waiver, because of the IDR adjustment that we're going to talk about next, and because of all of these efforts, there has never been a better time to consolidate if you have non-direct loans, because you no longer start at zero for PSLF. You no longer start at zero for income-based repayment, which offers forgiveness after 20 or 25 years. So historically, that has been the biggest issue with consolidation, is that you start at zero. And we've taken those big issues away. You no longer have to start at zero for those who are worried about that. But when you consolidate, you essentially have a new loan, and your monthly payment could change. It could go down, but it could also go up. And that's because if you consolidate and you no longer have a partial financial hardship, you could lose access to some of the income-based repayment plans, making it so that you have to be on one of the plans that has higher payment caps and amounts. If you have unpaid interest, it's going to interest and fees, your principal balance goes up because it will capitalize. Now, if you're working towards PSLF, you likely don't care about a lot of this, right? Because you're just trying to get to 120 and you're not worried about some of that, because that's just more that's going to get forgiven at the end. Your new consolidation loan will generally have a new interest rate because it's going to be based on a weighted average of the loans you consolidated. Again, if you're working towards PSLF, you probably don't care about this because you're just trying to get to 120. And you don't have to consolidate all of your federal student loans. You can consolidate 1 loan, 5 loans, 6 loans. It's up to you. But once you do that, once it's dispersed, you can't undo it. So I mentioned something called the IDR payment count adjustment because we don't have enough going on. We're trying to help borrowers. So we're trying to fix a lot of things that were broken in the system. So something else we announced in April was something called an IDR payment count adjustment. And it's to help borrowers who have been in repayment for a very long time, working towards IDR. There's been differences in how servicers treat this. There's been steering of borrowers into forbearances when they could have been on income-based repayment and has $0 or no dollar payments. So we announced this adjustment for IDR where we're going to fix everybody's account. We're going to do it one time only, and we're going to do that later this year and next year, right? And so, but it's also going to have an impact on PSLF. So a couple of things. Borrowers who have 12 or more months consecutive forbearance or 36 or more months cumulative forbearance, that's what we call our deeming long-term forbearance, and borrowers were steered into these. They're going to get credit for IDR. And if they submit PSLF forms, they can get credit for all those months towards PSLF as well. And we're going to do this all automatically as much as possible, but borrowers still have to submit their PSLF forms. And we're going to talk about how you submit a PSLF form next. Months spent in deferment prior to 2013 will count as long as it wasn't an in-school deferment. And we're counting months spent in economic hardship deferment after January 1st, 2013 as well. So again, you still have to submit PSLF forms, but you can get credit for these months now. And we're trying to do this automatically, but you still have to submit your forms. So quick recap on deferments, forbearances, and the PSLF waiver. So what automatically counts? The long-term forbearances we just talked about, the 12 or more months consecutive or the 36 or more months cumulative, you get automatic credit for those. Deferments prior to 2013, as long as it wasn't an in-school deferment, economic hardship deferments, and some military-related forbearances and deferments. You also can get credit for some short-term forbearances by submitting a complaint. So it's not automatic, but it's still a pathway. So quick note about what to expect when you're expecting. As of July 1 of this year, the PSLF servicer is now a company called MOHELA. So for those of you who are aware or have been in PSLF before or for a while, you know that for the longest time, our PSLF servicer was a company called Fed Loan Servicing, also known as FIA. They announced last year that they were leaving the system. So as of July 1, our current servicer is MOHELA, and borrowers on PSLF or who apply for PSLF now go to MOHELA and not Fed Loan Servicing. It's nothing to worry about. Everyone's going to get transferred. Transfers are a normal part of the process. It happens. I got transferred like a month ago from Fed Loan to MOHELA. It's okay. Your terms don't change. Your payment counts don't change. Everything will be the same. It's nothing to worry about. It's a normal part of the process, but it is happening. So if you're already with Fed Loan Servicing because you've already signed up for PSLF and you haven't been moved yet, you're going to be moved by the end of September, unless you're close to 120. And if that's the case, they'll keep you at Fed Loan Servicing because it doesn't make sense to transfer you and then forgive your loans. So that's the waiver. That's how it works. Those are the basics. Now we're going to talk about how you actually apply for PSLF. because it's not a separate application for the PSLF and the waiver. It's the same old application that it's been, which we want you to do through the PSLF help tool. It's the same application. It's just that if you do it now, if you raise your hand now and take all these steps, you get your account will be looked at through the waiver, not through the normal PSLF rules. And you want it to be looked at through the waiver because they're much more generous and they work better for so many borrowers. So you want to know how you can find out if your employer is a qualifying PSLF employer. Normally, until about a month or two ago, you had to log into your studentaid.gov account so you could use our PSLF help tool. We recently released this standalone employer tool, so anybody can use it. It's publicly facing. You don't have to have a studentaid.gov ID, and you can just check whether an employer is popping up in our system. It's the same database that's attached to our help tool. But when you use our help tool, you're going to use it to generate a form that looks like this. This is what the physical PSLF form looks like. Absolutely, you can download it and fill it out, but we do urge you to use our help tool because that just helps your form get processed faster. So you can find our help tool at studentaid.gov/PSLF. It'll look like this. It'll have a bunch of information, and you click log in to start because you're going to log into your studentaid.gov account. And the first thing it's going to ask you for is employment information, because that's what we need to know. Do you work for a PSLF eligible employer? And to do that, you're going to need something called an EIN, Employer Identification Number. And you're going to need the EIN for every single employer that you want to get credit for PSLF. You can see right here, the first thing we ask you for is not the name of your employer. We need the EIN. You need it for every single employer. And so you can find it on your W-2 in box B, as you can see here in red. You can find it on your pay stub, and you can find it just by reaching out to your HR department. But you're going to need the EIN for every single employer. Once you put in the EIN, a couple of things could happen. You could put in the EIN, and if you work for a federal or state or local agency like me, you'll put it in and multiple things will pop up. Like you see here, Department 1, Department 10. That's normal. There are a lot of agencies, particularly if you work in government, that share EINs. So you may see a bunch of things pop up. You need just to go through and find the one that best represents your agency or entity. Don't freak out. So that could happen. You could put in your EIN and it could show up as eligible in green, and meaning you're in a great position. It's popping up, it's already in our system. We know it's a qualifying employer. Or you could put in the EIN and it could show up as likely ineligible, like you see here in the orange. And that just means undetermined. It just means we don't know. We haven't looked at it yet. It's not in our system. And you shouldn't freak out about that if you know you work at a qualifying employer, because it's just a function of the fact that our system is not perfect. It's not infallible. And while we work every day to add new employers and to make sure it's up to date, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to have every single qualifying employer or every single employer that exists. So don't freak out if you get that. Still continue with the process. Or it could say ineligible in red. And that means we know who your employer is and we don't think it qualifies. We think it's a for-profit, or we think it's a labor union, or it's a nonprofit that doesn't provide a qualifying service. If that's the case and you think we're wrong, because we could be wrong, right? You should still continue. You're going to have to submit supporting documentation, which is like organization bylaws or website screenshots or something. But if you think we're wrong, still continue with the process, because remember, our system's not perfect. And the last thing that could happen is you could put in an EIN and nothing could pop up. It could say, are you sure this is your employer? Because it's not in our system at all. And it'll ask you to manually enter the address and all this other stuff. And if that's the case, again, still continue with the process. If it's not in our system, it still just has to go through our employer adjudication team. In any of those cases, as long as it's later approved, it's longer in PSLF eligible employer, you're still good. You've met the waiver. You don't have to worry about that. So once you put in your employer, and you can put in multiple at one time, you click next, it'll take you to the section called loan tips and just give you a bunch of information about consolidation and the COVID relief. Then it's going to take you to application details, where it's only asking you if you made 120 payments or not. Now, you may think you made 120 payments because you came to this presentation and you understand the waiver and you know you made 120 payments based on the waiver logic. But if our system just has not yet caught up to that, right, because you haven't consolidated or something like that, you still have to put no. It doesn't change how we process your form or anything like that, but you do have to answer the question, and you have to answer in a question that aligns with what our system thinks. Then you're going to click next. It's going to take you to your personal information section. You've logged into studentaid.gov, so this is going to automatically populate, but you can change stuff if you need to. Then you're going to click continue, you're going to go to the review and save page, and you're going to make sure everything looks right. You've put in everything correctly. Then you're going to click save. And if your employer or employers popped up as eligible, you're now going to get forms to download, because you're going to have to get each one signed by that employer, and you have to sign it. If your employer was not in our system, if it was likely ineligible or didn't pop up, it's created a case for our employer adjudication team. So you won't get a form right now. But again, as long as we later approve that employer, you're okay. You've met the waiver deadline. So for those of you who get a form, now you have to get it signed, and you want to make sure you follow the signature rules, because they're very specific. And if you don't do it right, it will get sent back. Trust me, mine has been sent back before. So what kind of signature is okay? And these are the rules for both the borrower and the employer. It can be hand drawn using like your signature pad or your mouse and your finger. It can be a scanned photo of a signature that was hand drawn on paper and you drop on that PDF. Or it can be a literal wet signature where you print it out and you draw it, right? And you write it in your own hand and your employer in their own hand. Those are all fine. You cannot do typed cursive fonts. So you can't go to like Adobe Edit and like find a cursive font and just type your name in. Doesn't count. You can't use any digital certificate-based signatures like DocuSign or anything like that. We don't allow that right now. We're working on it. That will be next year. But as of right now, even if you have DocuSign or your employer has DocuSign, you can't use that. So then once you have the signatures, you either mail it or fax it to Mohila, unless you already have Mohila, and then you can upload it right on their website. And then once you do that, you'll be able to track your payment counts on the Servicer website. You'll be able to see which payments are eligible versus ineligible, and why, and which ones are qualifying, meaning you also have qualifying employment certified. It'll look something like this on FedLoan. I don't have a picture of Mohila, but I'm working on that. Or you can look at studentaid.gov. This is your dashboard that I mentioned. And so you can see right here how many PSLF months you have. And again, I mentioned earlier, you can tell what type of loan you have. You'll see right here, it says Direct Graduate Plus. So we know right away, this is a direct loan, and we don't need to consolidate it unless we have some newer or older loans that we want to consolidate with it. So that's the basics. The best place to go for information about the waiver is studentaid.gov/PSLF waiver. For the help tool, studentaid.gov/PSLF. General PSLF information, studentaid.gov/public service. And remember, you are submitting your forms to Mohila. We've also included ways you can get in touch with FSA to ask questions about your account. And we will provide this after the webinar. But other than that, that is the end. And we will take questions now. Thank you. I know it was a lot of information.
It was definitely a lot of information, and we appreciate you so very much. It looks like we might have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. I'm not sure if you're able to see those, Ashley. Let's see. How long does it take to get the waiver? And once I receive my waiver, how long does it take for my loans to be forgiven?
It's a good question. So it depends. And I know people hate when you get that response. So if you still have to consolidate, right? You still have non-direct loans. We want you to submit your consolidation application and go ahead and get your PSLF form in as well, because we want you to make the deadline. But just know that if you don't have direct loans, your PSLF form is going to be held until you have direct loans. So the consolidation could take about 30 to 60 days, and then the form will be processed after that if you don't have direct loans. If you already have direct loans and you submit a form, it still depends. It could take 30 days or so, but also remember that we got a lot going on. We recently transitioned servicers, we're transitioning systems, and we have, a lot of applications coming in more than ever, which we love, which is the point of the waiver. So it could take a little bit longer than normal to get your application reviewed. But we just want to make sure everyone knows that as long as you get it in by the deadline and do your part, right? Everything else is on us. Don't worry about whether you get a notification back by October 31st. It's not about that. Just make sure you've done your part and got your stuff in, because you're not going to be held responsible for how long it takes us to do the things we have to do on our end.
Thank you so much. Ashley Ash, are you going, from our team, are you going to chime in, or do you want me to take the other questions? Because it looks like we have quite a few that populated since we got our first one.
I don't mind, Congresswoman.
All right, there we go.
Awesome. All right, our next question that we received, Ashley, should I be concerned about paying taxes on the loan amount forgiven? If so, will the full amount be added to my income in 1 year?
Good question. For PSLF forgiveness, it is not taxable. It's never been taxable. That's in statute. For the one-time debt relief, because of the American Rescue Plan, it also will not be taxable. There are a few states who may tax that debt relief, but at the federal level, it's not taxable, and PSLF is not taxable.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson asked, what if you don't work at the agency anymore? How do you go about getting signatures? Also, can you provide your W-2s?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I first say that we prefer the signature. That's your holy grail. You want to try to get a signature as much as possible. If you absolutely can't, because they no longer keep records, or that organization has closed, or they just are refusing to give you a signature, you have an option to say, I can't get a signature. And if that's the case, you can submit a W-2 or pay stubs or deposit records for those months, but you are going to have to submit something that shows you were employed by that employer.
Okay, Ashley, our next question, how can I find out how many payments I've made?
So a couple of ways. You can request your repayment history directly from your servicer. You can also look at studentaid.gov. When you go into your aid summary and click on the loans, it'll show you like your different repayment status, and you can estimate from there, but you can also just get it directly from your servicer.
Awesome. Joanne wanted to know, can we download this workshop? And I can answer that one for you, Ashley. We will actually have this available for sharing purposes on Facebook and then also on YouTube at the conclusion of the event. Thank you for watching again. All right, Ashley, can individuals who are in a fellowship program with the federal government qualify for PSLF? Does that qualify as employment?
Yeah, if you're getting paid and you're getting paid by the federal government or a nonprofit to work for the federal government, absolutely. Internships count if you're getting paid, all that. As long as you're not a volunteer, it counts.
Awesome. And this one's a little bit more specific to the district, but if you worked at Cleveland Jobs, I guess it's operated by a contractor, are you qualified for public service loan forgiveness? I believe that might be Job Corps. I'm not familiar with Cleveland Job, but I'll say it. So if it's a for-profit, so if Cleveland Job is actually a for-profit and that's who is paying you, then no, it doesn't count. You have to be directly employed by that qualifying PSLF employer. Now, if Cleveland Job is a nonprofit and it's a 501c3 nonprofit, or if it's another nonprofit that provides a qualifying public service, it could count. But if it's a for-profit, it doesn't count. Awesome. So to answer your question, D. Campbell, I'm not sure if Cleveland Job Corps is considered a nonprofit or not, but if it is, it will qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program. All right. And our last question we have, I consolidated my federal loans years ago and they were serviced by a private lender. I don't think they are direct loans. Can I consolidate those loans into a direct loan in order to qualify for PSLF? If so, will my payments that were made before the direct loan consolidation count towards the 120 payments? And I think this might be one of those borrower specific questions that we might have talked about.
Yeah, but based on what you were saying, it should. Log into studentaid.gov. If you can see your loans there, as long as you didn't refinance into the private sector, you should be able to consolidate. And then, yes, you can get credit for the time spent prior to consolidation, as long as you do everything by October 31st.
Okay. I have a question, Ashley. Is there a contact that people can use if they have any specific questions that are like more related to their borrowing questions? Who can they contact for those specific questions?
We can send it out after, but if you have specific questions about your account, call your servicer or call our FSA contact centers. If you have specific questions about PSLF, you can call Mohila. That's the PSLF servicer.
Perfect. I spoke too soon. We have some more questions that are still coming in. I want to make sure we can get as many as we can while we're here. If I was enrolled during the pandemic, do those loans still count towards my 120 payments?
If you were enrolled in school
Or you mean if you were in repayment?
I believe in the repayment program, the public service loan forgiveness.
Yes, you can get credit for if your loans are in repayment and you haven't had to make a payment since March of 2020, as long as you can still certify employment, you can get credit for every single one of these months. You can get credit for every single one of them. So you are a fourth of the way towards the 120.
Okay, now what if that person was enrolled in school during the 120 or during the pandemic there?
So if you're in school, then usually your loans have been put on deferment. If you're on in-school deferment, then no, you're not getting credit, even if you're working full-time in public service, because your loans aren't in repayment. If you've previously been in repayment, so now you went back to school, like to finish your degree or to get a grad degree or something else, you are able to opt out of that in-school deferment because you've previously been in repayment, and then you could consolidate if you needed to, or start making payments, take advantage of the last few months of the payment pause, all of that. And then you could get an IDR payment and continue working towards that 120 if you're not at 120. But in general, if you're in school, your loans are deferred and you would have had to opt out of that. And in order to consolidate, you would also have to opt out of that.
And another question, it's a little longer. I submitted my form, was told section 3 was not complete. I then looked at my application and section 3 was completed correctly. I called Fed Loan at first and was told that, and I was told it was completed correctly, and then was told it was completed, but my start dates were not legible. I was then told I had to redo my application and send it to Mohila. Is that correct?
It's very specific, but my advice would be if they denied it or they said it wasn't done right, just go ahead and send it in again. It doesn't hurt. Just fix those pieces, send it back in if you can.
Okay, and if they're now serviced with Mohila, that's probably the contact that they should use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Hope that answered your question, Anonymous. All right. Well, Ashley, was there anything else that you wanted to leave us with today before we signed off? Anything that we should just remember to?
Just remember 1031, get your stuff in, go to studentaid.gov, check all this out, check out the debt relief announcement. We're doing a lot of pieces. Just make sure that you don't miss out on this deadline, and please tell everyone you know, spread the word. We don't want anyone to miss out on this opportunity.
Awesome. All right. Well, Congresswoman, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
I want to thank both the Ashleys, my Ashley and the Ashley of the Department of Education, for hosting tonight's PSLF program webinar. A recording of tonight's webinar will be available on Facebook at repshontelbrown.com, Rep Shontel Brown. So please share the link to the stream with others so that they too can benefit from this important information. And before I close, I'd also like you to invite you to participate in my virtual town hall this Thursday. That's September the 8th at 6:30 p.m. I'll share more important updates from Washington and take some live questions from neighbors in our district. So to register for the town hall, it's really easy. All you have to do is visit shontelbrown.house.gov. Again, that's shontelbrown.house.gov before 5:30 p.m. on Thursday. Or you can call 833-946-1545. That's 833-946-1545 promptly at 6:30 p.m. Thursday to listen in. Or you can watch the live stream on my website at shontelbrown.house.gov or on facebook.com/Rep Shontel Brown. So a lot of ways to stay connected with us and to join us for that hybrid town hall. Again, that's Thursday, September the 8th at 6:30. If you have more questions about tonight's information, and that's the PSLF limited waiver, please visit studentaid.gov or call my district office staff at 216-522-4900. Again, that number to my district office is 216-522-4900. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Until next time.